Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to AuthorStory, the home of authors and stories that matter. I'm your host, Alexander Lim, and this episode's featured guest is Amra Sabic El-Rayess, author of The Cat I Never Named, A Story of Love, War, and Survival. So, Amra, welcome to AuthorStory. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, so first off, I'd like to get a little bit into your background. Um, and from the story, it was a bit of a rough one. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, the question is, where would you like me to start?
All right. Okay. Well, you feel free to start anyway. I mean, I'm not quite sure where where to start myself.
Excellent. So, I'm going to try to be brief, but as you already indicated, suggested, my life has not been easy. Obviously, from early on in former Yugoslavia, I grew up as a Bosnian Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Muslims were discriminated against, and
Mm-hmm.
I clearly indicate that in my book, in The Cat I Never Named, particularly in the context of education, how a young person who is not accepted and marginalized for their religious or ethnic or racial background may be treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that discrimination, eventually the war broke out in former Yugoslavia, and
Mm-hmm.
it was particularly bloody in Bosnia and Herzegovina,
Mm-hmm.
led to genocide against Bosnian Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, I spent nearly 4 years under the military siege by the Serb military in my hometown of Bihać.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and during that time, lived without electricity,
Mm-hmm.
starved, lost many members of my family. My house was blown up,
Right.
or a portion of it was blown up. It was directly hit by a bomb. So it was a pretty tough upbringing. However, I grew up in an extremely loving family, which comes through in my book, and that love was particularly important during the survival of the war.
Yeah, and I mean, in any extreme, conflict or stress situation like that, I mean, I guess it's a love. It's a love of family that would help keep you well together, help keep you alive, help keep you sane, for lack of another word, isn't it?
That's correct. And I think a lot of listeners and readers of my book will certainly find parallels between the importance of love during that kind of extreme circumstance that I had gone through, surviving genocide against my entire people and war, to the circumstances that we're all living in now in the midst of pandemic. And I would say also um, a level of social unrest in the United States where young people and adults are equally uncertain about what the future may bring.
Hmm.
And so love of those closest to us is extremely important. And I know, Alex, you have another kind of love close to you, a little calico, which is also a kind of love that I experienced during the war with Matzi,
Hmm.
or a calico cat that came in with refugees at the beginning of the war,
Hmm.
um, and became really the main character in my book, but also in my life, helping me survive many difficult moments throughout the war. And her love was the unconditional kind of love that we often find with pets.
Hmm. Right, right. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, pets. I mean, I know from experience that they don't care who you are. I mean, they don't care if you're black, white, Muslim, Christian, whatever. They just if they love you, they really love you.
You're obviously more than right in that comment, and I think that kind of love, particularly in difficult times where one feels hated, targeted, rejected, and in my case, nearly killed for who I am and who I was, that kind of love really changes one's sense of self. And
Mm-hmm.
in my case, Matsi came into my hometown of Bihać with the refugees. I won't go into the detail of that encounter and the scene, but
Right.
there's a moment where we meet, and to be very honest, I did not like animals. I didn't like animals because I was attacked by a German Shepherd that my uncle had when I was younger, and
Mm-hmm.
I was scared of anything with claws.
Mm-hmm.
And but this kitty showed up in my life in an unexpected moment and followed my dad and me home and just never left.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that she never left, but on one of the initial days of bombing of my city, she made a difference in my brother and I surviving or
Mm-hmm.
being blown up along with several of our friends. If it were not for Matsi, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be giving you this interview. I wouldn't have written this book. So
Mm-hmm.
Matsi really becomes this light, incredible light in my life and guiding light during the most difficult time
Mm-hmm.
that I've ever had.
Right, right. And I mean, it's from your words alone. I mean, it's obvious that she was very important to you for for helping you keep your head in all the craziness, for lack of a better word. I mean, there are worse words than that, but I'll stick with craziness. For all the craziness that went on. Um, was she how do I put this? Would you say that she was? I mean, from what I read, it seems that you kind of picked her up along the way. Was she, in your opinion, did she already belong to someone? I mean, it seemed that she was already used to humans.
That's correct. She was, I would say, a brilliant living being. She was incredibly bright, incredibly kind and generous and polite. I do believe, we don't know that for sure, but she did come into my city at the beginning of the war when the Serb military started executing Bosnian Muslims. We were simply civilians. We had no weapons to really defend ourselves.
Right.
And so the executions were massive and persecutions of Bosnian Muslims and
Right.
um, oth- other non-Serbs were significant early on. And so they were refugees coming into my city. And I suspect that Mati had a family, that she
Mm-hmm.
followed the refugees, but it may be that her family was killed, lost, that something had happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
That is my belief. And it was simply that I, in particular moment, interacted with her in a kind way,
Mm-hmm.
and that scene is vividly depicted in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And she simply would not leave.
Mm-hmm.
She followed us home, and she refused to leave. There's a moment where she follows me in the house. My home had a lot of windows, and she would jump from one window to the next
Mm-hmm.
and jump on the back legs and with her front paws keep knocking and crying and calling me to open the door until she really adopted herself into our family. And I would
Nice.
say, in terms of everything that had happened in the war, she was the best thing that happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you can imagine a life without now we're in the midst of pandemic and we are challenged by the lack of social interaction, but in the
Mm-hmm.
context of my war that I had survived, we didn't have electricity, we didn't
Mm-hmm.
have internet, we didn't have media, we had no access to the outside world or
Right.
any form of entertainment. So Matzi was really everything to us at that time. My brother and I would often play with her, and she was extremely polite and patient with us.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to give our listeners a sense of a little bit of a sense of how important Matzi was for you. First off, I'd like to give if it's okay, can you give a little backgrounder on how how bad things were, and then after that maybe yeah. Well, first off, can you give us a little background of how bad things were? Because I mean, the war, it's been 20 plus years, and I'm sure memories are starting to fade. So can you tell us a little bit about, yeah, how bad things were?
Mhm. I would say, in terms of the comment that you had made about memories fading, I would say that what happens when you live through something so intense, such as
Mm-hmm.
war, genocide, um, what fades is dates when something may
Yeah.
have happened. Was it a Thursday or a Friday, or was it in 92 or 93?
Right.
But one memory that never fades for those of us who had lived through a genocide is
Mm-hmm.
blood on the pavement, blown up body
Mm-hmm.
that one passes by
Right.
or is exposed to. The intensity of pain is still there, and often it takes only a song or a moment or sometimes a scent to bring me back
Mm-hmm.
to a particular scene. So,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the question of how bad genocide in Bosnia was, I describe in the book, in one of the chapters, a moment when that today, perhaps teens in particular may relate to, when I learned that we will have school again. As you can imagine, in the midst of living under a military siege, being bombed by hundreds, perhaps thousands of bombs a day
Mm-hmm.
in certain parts of Bosnia, not only in Bihać, we didn't have schooling, normal schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the fear was that often, in my case, the school was targeted by the Serb military with the intent to kill all of the children, all of
Mm-hmm.
the teens. So going to school meant risking your life and really living in my city during the day or night, being in the house or outside. There was no social distancing that could protect me from death.
Mm-hmm.
Meant that I was constantly at risk of being blown up. And
Mm-hmm.
many of my friends were killed. I depict some of those moments. They were simply teens like me, many of them math nerds who had their crushes or played soccer or volleyball or basketball before the war,
Right.
and their lives just ended
Mm-hmm.
with by a bomb, often, and being blown up. And so the difficulty of losing someone almost every day, someone I knew, someone I loved, somebody who was a neighbor, became a norm, and that is not normal, and that
Mm-hmm.
should never be normal in anybody's life, whether one is of a particular religion or particular race,
Mm-hmm.
and that is that is captured in vivid details in the book. And the reason why I ensured that I include some of these moments where I had lost the loved ones is because I do fear what will happen in the United States of America in the coming months, and I do worry about the growing both racism and social unrest
Mm-hmm.
that concerns me,
Mm-hmm.
where that may lead.
Mm-hmm.
Because in former Yugoslavia, I didn't expect that we would end up in the war. I certainly never expected I would be living through genocide and lose as many family members and friends as
Mm-hmm.
I did. And
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that another theme that comes up in the book that I um, would share is that sexual violence became a tool of war.
Mm-hmm.
So there is certainly um, a, a painful scene, one of the most painful ones for me, when during the war we were starving and desperate for food, when my mother and I crossed the enemy line and go through the minefields to attempt to buy the food from our enemies, from the Serb military. And you can see how insane that would be. But that's a reflection of utter desperation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a moment where I almost get raped by a Serb soldier,
Mm-hmm.
and that scene is particularly intense in the book, but it is also extremely vivid and painful memory for me
Mm-hmm.
to this till today.
Right. Okay. Well, first I'd like to apologize, Amra, because when I meant about memories fading, I meant for, people who have not been through it, because I know something like that is something that people who've gone through it would not forget. But
Mhm.
for someone like who read the newspaper articles or followed the war about 20 years ago, and they look back on it now and think, it doesn't hit them as much. So that's what I meant. So my apologies for that.
Oh no, no, absolutely no need to apologize. And I just really that's one question that actually people often ask. How do you handle those memories, and have you recovered from surviving the war? And I always say that in an intense experience such as a war, genocide, one never fully recovers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It changes you fundamentally, changes who you are, changes how you live your life, it changes the way you look at other people,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes you just more empathetic to anyone's discrimination and cause. And that is a reflection of surviving a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
I describe it as a mental troll that remains in you and with you for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
But certain details, like dates or who was killed on what date, or when did I go to someone's funeral, was it
Mm-hmm.
even what was the season, may have been forgotten, but there are
Mm-hmm.
certain scenes that remain vivid in you for the rest of your life. So that question was completely fine. I understand
Mm-hmm.
where you were coming from.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that. Um, all right. So it was pretty dark then, and the fact you did mention your desperation at having to cross enemy lines just to get food. I mean, under normal circumstances that would have been crazy, but under those circumstances that was the logical thing to do. Um, so with all the darknesses going on, you did tell me that Matzi helped give some sort of semblance. Can you give us a little, just one incident where she showed just how important she was to keeping you guys sane?
Well, I'll share the moment, or a bit of a detail on really the first time when we realized that Matzi was incredibly special, and that was June 12th, 1992, the
Mm.
very first day when Serb military, after besieging us, begins to bomb my city. And my house was very much open, filled with light, with lots of windows. And so my parents, prior to the beginning of the bombing, in anticipation of the war, had my younger brother Dino, and myself um, sort of displaced into a basement of a neighbor's house, and also a relative of ours. So we were in this basement for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bombing begins. And of course, when the bombing begins, it's for the first time that we're experiencing, we're terrified. We're hearing of people whose houses have been blown up or who have been killed.
Mm-hmm.
Started very early in the morning. And in the midst of that chaos, my parents, who are always looking to help others, are figuring out with our neighbors what needs to be done. And my brother and I, being teens, you can imagine, locked up with a number of people in this basement for a very long time, decided that we're going to escape and go see Matzi.
Mm-hmm.
Matzi stayed in our house. And we wanted to make sure that she's okay.
All
And
right.
so we sneak out, end up going to our house. And in that moment, the bombing, when we snuck out, the bombing sort of temporarily stopped. And
Mm-hmm.
given that we didn't have the experience during the war, we didn't know that this is what Serb military would continue to do for the rest of the war, which is they would occasionally, especially on a nice day, stop bombing to draw people out. And once people are out on the streets, they would intensely bomb and kill a large number of, or large groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to our house, and when we're there, we encounter four of our friends, girls. One of them was in my school, in my pre-K class growing up, and we were very, very close friends. And we started talking and smiling when we thought, oh, maybe the war's over, the bombing has stopped. And in that moment, my brother and I hear Matzi sort of um, in the background, and we start looking for her, calling her, but she's nowhere to be found. Then
Uh-huh.
we see her. We get concerned. My brother goes in one direction, I go in another direction, and in that moment, a bomb hits and blows up four of our friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that is one moment where my life would have ended on the very first day of the war. My brother's life would have ended on the very first day of the war if it were not for Matzi, who really made us look for her rather than coming to us
Mm-hmm.
at that moment. And there are a number of other scenes and moments throughout the book. Particularly, I would say there is a moment where we have to escape the city.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we are afraid for our lives. We take Matsu with us. We go to a bee farm by my uncle and aunt outside of the city where we thought we would be safe. We get there. We learn that sort of military is approaching there, that we're not safe there either.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, again, in a moment of chaos and panic, we have to leave. And
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, we couldn't find Matzi. Matzi
Mm-hmm.
was somewhere, called her, and my parents obviously make my brother and me leave with them without finding Matzi because our lives were at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And um, all I'm going to say is that Matzi comes back home.
Mm-hmm.
Matzi returns home. She had to cross the hills. She had to um, uh, walk through probably minefields to get back to us. But she came home on her own from a location that she's never been to before that was distant from the city.
Mm-hmm. Nice, nice. Yeah, I've heard stories about these, like pets, dogs, cats coming home to their families after walking for miles. But this was something else. It was dangerous out there. Mines and all. So yeah, so she must have been very strongly bonded to you guys.
She was, and with her, um, the a similar trend repeats itself on a number of occasions. And what was unusual for me at the time, we certainly didn't expect her that she would be able to return home the way she did.
Mm-hmm.
We always had an expectation growing up as kids. The dogs do that, but
Mm-hmm.
not cats.
Right.
She was, as I said early on in our conversation, she was unusual. She was so intelligent, so kind, so brilliant. She would even catch mice or catch birds sometimes by the river,
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful river Una that I write about in the book, and bring it to our front door as a gift to us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, very often during the war. And so she was a unique cat.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay, cool. All right. All right. So Amra, on to another tag. I know a lot of folks think about writing a book, but did you ever think you would ever write one?
Great question, Alex. I always enjoyed both math, as readers will understand from my background. I was a math and physics nerd, won some math and physics competitions back at home in my old country, and was always very much understanding of the fact that education was important, particularly when you
Mm-hmm.
were discriminated against. And I think this is something that um, uh, young adults and kids in the United States can relate to. When you experience discrimination, you're looking for an outlet, how you can be accepted and valued in society. And that
Mm-hmm.
outlet for me was education. So I
Mm-hmm.
was in a rigorous math high school. I was a top student there, but I also loved writing. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually wrote poetry in my own language during the war. Unfortunately, those poems have been lost after my house was bombed during the
Mm-hmm.
war. So I've always enjoyed writing,
Mm-hmm.
and have done a lot of writing as an academic, as a professor at Columbia University. And for years, my students in particular at Columbia, when I would share a story with them to make a point more memorable in my classes, students will often say, Professor Amra, when will you write your life story,
Right.
lend it to educators? And so I thought about it for a long time, but there was also a part of me that was afraid of going
Mm-hmm.
back to the writing process. When
Mm-hmm.
you need to remember the vivid details of bodies being blown up, or how close you came to being killed or being raped, it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And you really spend, as I really spent as a survivor, many years working on trying to forget those
Mm-hmm.
moments. So there has to be a point in life where you feel strong enough to challenge yourself and go there. And quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly, I didn't know what the outcome of that process would be. Didn't know if it would trigger PTSD or some other emotional challenge, but I was willing to take that risk and learn.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what made you finally decide to, finally write the cat I never named?
Concern for what will happen to the world and
Mm-hmm.
what will happen to young adults and kids in America who are growing up, like my two daughters who asked me one question that I got from my children, particularly my younger daughter Dina, a couple of years ago. That was, I would say, a trigger to writing this story. Was
Mm-hmm.
a question of, Mom, what will happen to me and Jana, her
Mm-hmm.
older sister, if, as Muslims, you and Dad are rounded up and taken away?
Mm-hmm.
Um, will we be left alone? And that question is a question I never wanted to hear from my child,
Mm-hmm.
or my children. And that has become our reality now. And I wanted the world to be reminded that when those kinds of questions appear in the minds of young adults,
Mm-hmm.
which what happened to me prior to the war, we're on a path that is destructive
Mm-hmm.
as a society. And I wanted my book to serve as a warning where
Mm-hmm.
we could end up if we allow racism and hatred and discrimination to define who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I also hope that by writing this story, I would evoke empathy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of love, and there's a lot of funny details, and there are a lot of moments in the book that will um, allow each and every reader to connect with the story. And
Mm-hmm.
my hope is that if a reader and every reader can connect with elements of who I was and what I had experienced, that we can connect with each other on a basic um, uh, human level and hopefully work to counter hatred, because that is what we as a society, as the world, need now.
Right, right. Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, with all that's going on, yeah. Okay, so Amra, in the last minute or so of this interview, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners and possibly anyone else who might listen to this interview?
I would mention that I have been we've addressed a lot of details relating to the book and touched upon a number of themes,
Mm-hmm.
but I would also say that I have been uh, pleasantly surprised when I was writing the book. I didn't really think about how the book would be reviewed or received by the readers and book critics in the United States and beyond. But I have been pleasantly surprised with all the starred reviews that the book has been receiving, and the general praise from those that are reaching out to me, that are librarians, educators, or book critics
Mm-hmm.
who have loved the book. And as you probably know, Kirkus Reviews, as an example, has called it unforgettable.
Mm-hmm.
And that was particularly touching because this story is unforgettable to me. It will live with me for the rest of my life, and certainly will live with my children who have heard it growing up. But it means so much to know that that is how others are experiencing the cat I never named. But I
Mm-hmm.
would also mention that while I'm grateful for that kind of reception, that I have also received threatening emails, messages on social media, where I had only recently become more active in preparation for the book's launch, that have come from racists, and I would say many who are uh, 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 who have hated me during the war, and who only now even more viscerally hate me because I'm here and because I have a voice, and I am willing to share my story. So I just want your listeners to get the sense of what it takes to write a story like mine. It's not only a memoir, it's not only my life story, but it's a life story that continues to, by being out there, continues to attract those in the fringes of our society who are
Mm-hmm.
looking to harm emotionally and otherwise someone with a diverse background, even though I don't know who they are, even though they've never met me. But simply being a Muslim is sufficient for them to hate me. And that, while it's painful, is something I'm used to. I grew up having that target on my back, but I am speaking up because I am thinking about the new generations growing up in this country. I am thinking about current young adults who are Black, brown, who may be experiencing similar kinds of targeting and discrimination in their lives. I want them to see a connection with what I had gone through, and also understand that we can build our resilience, and we can uh, uh, move through life and counter that kind of discrimination and hatred.
Mm-hmm. All right, all right. Well, very good words there, and yeah, it does resonate. I mean, your story does resonate. Definitely does resonate in today's environment. Okay, then. So, in closing, and then our guest is Amra Sabic El-Rayess. Reyes, sorry. The book is The Cat I Never Named, a true story of love, war, and survival, and you can find it on Amazon. So, Amra, thank you very much for being author story. Thank you very much for sharing, for writing the book and for sharing this part of your life. And, it was really great being able to speak with you.
Thank you, Alex, very much for having me. And please send my regards to your little calico in the background that I would love to meet one day. And thank, thank you to all of your listeners for listening to our conversation. And I would love to hear from them once they read the book. I certainly enjoy getting emails and getting messages via social media. They can find me on Twitter as Amra Sabic, PhD, or they can find me under my full name, Amra Sabic El-Rayess, on Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn. And so I hope some of them will connect with me in the coming months. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. And, listeners, feel free to go ahead and connect with her. So everyone, again, check out Amra Sabic El-Rayess' book, The Cat I Never Named, and please feel free to comment below and hit that subscribe button to listen to the people and stories we'll cover in the future. So I'll see you guys next time on Author Story when we talk to another great author and hear about their story.